All right, good afternoon, everybody. Unless you're in California, we're still just a little bit before noon out there. As I said, I'm Monty Canode, the Director of Customer and Partner Success for Horizon 3 AI, and we are hosting a tech talk today to talk about compliance in security. And to get us started is the Chief Technology Officer for the company, Anthony Pelletier. Tony, if you can give us some good words to get rolling.
Yeah, thanks, Monty. I appreciate it. And thanks to everybody for joining. I think it's something to bring up is, and I told the team that I was going to bring this up, when we put this out, 2 weeks ago, hey, we're going to talk about compliance in security. We were like, I wonder how many people are going to show up to this live thing. And now we see yesterday, there were only 5 folks who had signed up for this tech talk. And now today, I think we have, what was the total count of signups? Not our people. You're muted. 17?
Sorry, we're at 22.
22?
We have 10 in right now.
10 folks attending. I think it really goes to show about, the issues that come up when you talk about compliance. Compliance is boring, but it has to be there. So just something that I wanted to bring up. We're also going to do this tech talk a little bit differently than we normally do. The first 3, we kind of did a presentation to talk about some information and then turn it into a discussion and Ask Hackers Anything, our aha moments, which we find are really useful for folks. We're going to do this one a little bit more fireside chat to talk through some things and hopefully folks will get a lot out of it. This is no sales. I wanted to make sure that these talks were not a sales thing at all. It is us giving back to the community and us helping where we can. Practitioners having discussions, practitioners talking about the things that bug us, like some of the things that come up when you talk about compliance and the difference between compliance and security. So I'm looking forward to the discussion. And usually this is where I would bow, take a step back and let the experts talk. But now I get to jump in on the discussion as well. So it'll be good. And with that, welcome everybody. I'm glad everybody's here. This is number 3 of these tech talks, and we hope we're going to keep doing these once a month and help give them back to the community. So we hope to see you on the next ones as well. So Monty, back to you. Thanks, brother.
You bet. Thank you very much, Tony. Okay, everybody. So to get us rolling here, I just want to set up one ground rule here. We're not going to let your audio or video come through, but we highly encourage any questions. And if you've been to either of our previous tech talks, you'll know that we take those very seriously. We look at them both during this and we try to answer every question that we get so you can get a real-time answer. And that goes through our aha moments as well with the Ask Hackers Anything. You're going to see we've got a great panel today that's got some defensive and offensive minded people, some people who have been architecting in the cloud for quite a while, and we're looking forward to get into it. So without further ado, here's the agenda. What we really want to do is make sure that we understand the truth of compliance. And that truth is that compliant doesn't mean you're secure. And I think we all know this, but really confronting it to know that compliance is a ground floor level and what we need to do beyond that. There's a lot of discussion around that. And as many of us know, there have always been some of those security checkboxes that we've seen, whether it's a company culture or a personal agenda to do more or less. Those are some of the things we're going to talk about. As well, we'll go into a little bit of anatomy of attack, where we're going to talk to a couple of our attackers and talk about how they maneuver around compliance baselines, or once again, addressing that compliant doesn't always mean secure. And there are a few extra things you could do that could confound their efforts. Lastly, we're going to go into how this is a team sport. This is one of our favorite parts, is where we come back with recommendations. This isn't just about us complaining about a problem or complaining about compliance, but here's how we can help one another. Because this is how we raise our collective bar. And the more you're secure, I'm secure, everybody wants their bank to hold their data securely. So how do we go about doing our own efforts on this, making sure that we don't have a dumb password that somebody else could use to get into our accounts and go from there? We'll talk a little bit about that. And then we'll close off, and that's really the Q&A portion of this with the Ask Hackers Anything. So to get started, just to kind of set the stage, when we're talking about compliance here, We're talking about standards. There's a number of frameworks that are out there, and there's a number of best practices. And so this diagram was put together just to identify on the left some of those things that are regulatory. And you can see it goes across industry. There are certain things that are relative to government, where you might have DFARS, which is contractual information, or FedRAMP, how you get into a government cloud and what the compliance requirements are for there. Or there's even some other things, such as, with some of our children and some of the education and child data that we want to make sure that is held very closely. Of course, you can see in the green lettering there, those are the data regulatory standards. So where your personally identifiable information, things like your social security number, and when combined with your name and address and birth date, that creates PII. And so there's a lot of regulation around some of those. And then on the right, there's best practices. These aren't things that are demanded of you, but if you want to get a SOC 2 certification, you have to meet certain standards using the trusted services criteria put together by accountants and CPAs across the world that said, hey, this is what we think it takes. And I'm sure in coordination with security experts. But when you talk about high trust and medical side, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the NIST cybersecurity framework. Some of these best practices that really matter, as well as with ISO 27001. Those are best practices that we want to use, and you've probably seen it on some of those stamps on a few of the websites where a company will identify, we adhere to these standards. And so what these are is really a floor. And that's kind of what we want to talk about is there is a number of regulatory requirements that your banking industry must abide by, that internationally, now in Europe with GDPR, they must maintain your data in a certain way. And then above that, you have some best practices that have been identified by security experts that say, hey, we recommend this, like with the OWASP Top 10 that talks about your attack surface and with web applications. And out at that front end, which is that first door that an attacker might run into, what are the top 10 best practices that we might want to use? And so just wanted to make sure that we have a little bit of clarification here on the difference between regulation, best practice going forward. And the reason why we say compliant isn't secure. So there's a couple stories, and so we're going to identify a few things up front here, such as Marriott. They had their payment card industry DSS compliance when they were hacked. Now, the reason why I bring that one up is when they got hacked and a little over 20 million records were pulled from them, that went through their customer referral program. And their the one where you get your Marriott points, that was how the hackers came in and got at them. They didn't come through the payment card industry, but what people tend to believe is if they meet one set of compliance, then they're good across the board. And I think what we all know is there are multiple environments, multiple different areas of your network that are more critical and where your data is not going to be all over the place. It's going to be in one. And so those kind of understanding one compliance measure doesn't necessarily mean the entire company and all of its cybersecurity posture is all good. And since it's such a hot topic right now, SolarWinds, we all know, well, as we've learned over the last couple of months, how bad that one's gotten. They were SOC 2 compliant. And SOC 2, like we said, that's based off the trusted services criteria. There's some really good compliance items in there. And you're going to get to meet Travis here in a little bit. He's running us through our SOC 2 compliance, and it's loads of fun. Super easy, not at all hard to gather up all that documentation. But just because a company was compliant did not mean that they were secure. And there were a few practices that happened where the bad guys got in, and let alone in their software development cycle, it permeated out through the supply chain. That many out there, 300,000 customers, were then vulnerable to. But the downloading of that software, that current version, that was about 18,000, and then it goes down from there. But the main point is they were compliant, but that didn't mean that they were that compliance prevented them from getting hacked. British Airways, I brought up GDPR just a little bit ago. they were fined for failing GDPR compliance. And that was after, not before. They weren't audited, but because their data got pulled out in the wild after a ransomware attack and they did not pay, they then got fined by GDPR because of some of the practices that they were holding to. And that was after they were hacked and that credit card data was stolen. So making sure that you're compliant is just the start. And so we're going to go into a little bit of story time here where each of us are going to talk a little bit about some of the things that we've seen happen as part of a starter. And then we're going to have a little bit of Q&A amongst us. And if you have any questions, please do go on into your Zoom screen there. You can submit a question at any given moment, and we'll go ahead and dig into that. And we've got a couple polls that we want to bring up. And so what I'm going to do is go ahead and put the first poll out there. And this one's very simple. What I like most about cybersecurity compliance in the company where I work is, and so this is all anonymous, so we're not tracking names or anything. So please go ahead and submit in your answers for the poll. And while you're taking a look at that poll, we're going to have everybody in the group here is going to have a little bit of a story about compliance and some of the things they've done. And so, Tony, if you'd like to go ahead and get started off with something that you've seen, I believe you've got some compliance stories in some of your software development cycles that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, so I don't have a specific story about compliance, but it was a way that we helped alleviate a lot of the toil that we had when it came to the compliance side. So in one of the organizations I was in, we had to do these checklists per system. And that was part of the RMF, the risk management framework. Travis, he's overly familiar with how that all gets implemented, but it's very, very documentation heavy. And it was a nightmare to put together all of this documentation, and it was so repetitive and very difficult to keep track of because there was so much of it. There was no system for it. And we talk about SolarWinds, and I was a SolarWinds zealot. I love me some SolarWinds. Still do. I think it's a great product, a good bang for the buck. They obviously have some issues that they need to sort out. But back when I was using it, that wasn't something that I was concerned about. So I used SolarWinds to kick off, this automation that would assess each one of the systems that I was monitoring, determine what type of checks I needed to perform on each of them, and then it would write the proper documentation dynamically. It was just an XML document that you could open in a specific viewer. So we would automatically generate that for each type of check that had to happen. And then I leveraged a different system that would analyze each one of those files that I generated. And as people were updating them because they had completed the checks, I had a real-time view of all of the manual checks that had to be done. And then we started performing automated checks and automatically updating the documentation all the time. And this, everybody talks about, especially in RMF, step 6 is continuous. The hard part about that is nobody ever gets to continuous because they're so busy dealing with all the other stuff that they can't actually get there. And that system really helped us. It helped us pass our inspection, and it made it more continuous. I started with the idea of automation up front and continuous from the get-go, so that as you added to it, you were just adding to the automation instead of trying to do all this stuff manual and losing track of everything. And I had a bottom line. Let me find my bottom line. So my bottom line with compliance is the intention is solid. Here are a set of controls that must be implemented, a set of policies you must create. Here's what should be in them. Here's what you should be following. And overall, you must document you must have like a documented risk strategy so that it covers X, Y, and Z. Here are those X, Y's, and Z's. So that customers and people and users, they can feel safe knowing that their privacy, their funds, their credit, their livelihoods, and their data is being reasonably protected. Right? That's the intent. with compliance. But that's only 6 pieces of flair. And for anybody who's seen The Office, I want you to have some more flair. So 37 pieces of flair is the minimum, Stan. Make the minimum 37 pieces of flair. If you haven't seen The Office, go watch The Office. But compliance is, sorry, not The Office, Office Space. Thank you.
There you go.
Throwing things at me. Office Space. Love that movie. The point is, automation is hugely important, and compliance is like just the bare minimum feel good, but it does not make you secure. That's my bottom line on like the whole thing. So I want to make sure I brought that up. So that was my story. Automate, use whatever systems you have available to do the automation, understand what checks you need to do, monitor it over time, and monitor it consistently. Constant, continuous monitoring is my take on that.
Thanks, Tony. Next, I'm going to pivot over here to Travis. Travis, like you said, I don't think anybody wants to claim they're an expert in compliance and regulatory standards, but we're going to pivot over to Travis and let him share a story that resonates with him and what we think is going to with you as well. Over to you, Travis.
Thanks, Monty. Yeah, I will no way say I'm an expert. I'm a frequent sufferer of compliance, I think, throughout my career and the things that I've had to do with it. A lot of the very last big compliance, other than the current SOC 2 thing that I'm working on now, was anybody that's in the military will be familiar with the CCRI process, which is tons and tons of fun and tons of different things. The big thing that I found, and me and Tony were actually having a conversation earlier about this, and when you're doing compliance, there's all these things that are the bare minimum checks, and the intent is good and the ideas behind it are good. But if the people who are doing it don't care, then a lot of times you're just going to fill the bare minimums to meet the intent so you can pass it, and which doesn't actually improve your security posture or really help you in any ways. And one way to quickly assure that the people that are doing this don't care is to throw something like this on them last minute, where, hey, we have this inspection coming up in 2 weeks. I need you to drop everything and do these. And that's one thing that we frequently, at least I, in every CCRI inspection that I was ever part of, a lot of that would happen, where they would find there were gaps because we haven't been paying attention to something for X number of years or however long. And now we're going to throw all these people at it, and we're going to say, you guys need to fix this. So what that does is it creates a lot of people that are trying to fix a problem that they didn't know that they had to fix before. You're pulling them off of all the other things that they need to focus on. So you're kind of losing sight of the entire forest, to look at a few trees. And it's just going to create a lot of issues in the long run. And one thing Tony said that kind of resonates with that is building automation from the beginning rather than coming in later to try and automate things. So what we tried to do after many of these experiences with CCRIs and different types of inspections like this was try to start to build in some processes that were to automate the things from the get-go rather than just playing catch up. And Tony, if he wants to chime in later on some of that, can speak to it, because he was instrumental in a lot of the pieces for automating things and figuring out ways to make those better within our environments. Another thing that I'm discovering, though, since I've gotten out and working with different people in industry, is it's similar to our inspections. In some ways, you're semi at the mercy of the auditor, the person that's giving you the audit. They might be looking for different things. Like, you would think that I've talked to quite a few people that have gone down the SOC 2 process and quite a few people that have done the PCI process and things like that. And you would think that, okay, this is a compliance, so everybody should be held to this exact same standard, but that's not what I'm finding. I'm finding this auditor, might look a little bit more into this area. This auditor might look a little bit more into that area and things like that. And so what that's doing is it's kind of creating a different battlefield, as it were. And this area, you might be super secure on this because this auditor cares about this, but you're ignoring everything else. And I, again, going back to, I think that you'll hear us kind of harping on it over and over again throughout the process of this, is the automation piece of it. However you're automating it, if you're not automating your security checks and different things like this, however you're doing it, you're going to be constantly playing catch up for these type of things when these inspections go on, and you're never going to be moving forward on it and making
how many organizations have we been talking to where they're like, hey, we've stopped everything and now we got to work on this new SOC 2 check, this new SOC 2 thing that we're doing, or this new PCI. We've stopped everything because there is nobody gets to continuous where it's just, yeah, here's our latest, here's the latest diff, or here's the latest update on this, or here is a portal that you can automatically go to. Just check it whenever you want, auditors, whenever you're ready. There isn't something like that as far as I'm tracking. Naveen, do you know of anything? I don't think there's anything like that.
No, I don't.
Yeah, so nobody has enough people or time.
I didn't think about the subjectivity. How some of these things are subjective, even though they are supposed to be pretty on and off. I think that's interesting.
And I'm glad that you brought up this subject of continuous, Travis. And Tony started it where he's talking about a step 6, and you're talking about continuous. How's that played into a workload for you? So you're talking about automation and continuous. Can you just expand on that a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, so when we're as Monty said at the beginning, we're kind of running down our road to begin our SOC 2 attestation and get that piece going. And one thing that, as we were looking at the different processes, and you know as well, because you've been on parts of this with me as well, if the checks and the things like that, especially things that are the technology pieces of it, are not automated, then I'm going to move on to a different solution and find a different way to do it to where it is automated, because I'm not going to build in manual processes to it, because then it's going to become, that's my job. Like, in order to keep this process going, and not because it's not what I want to do, because compliance is so exciting, but because it's not beneficial to the company or any organization as it is if you're dedicating a resource solely to doing that when you don't have to. A lot of the things, and Tony has told me this many times, automate yourself out of a job type of thing in those areas, because then we can move on and we can kind of expand into new areas and keep developing. And if we don't do that with the SOC 2 process, then I'm just going to be sitting there filling out spreadsheets. And there's no reason why you can't build the process from the forefront like that. And a lot of what I have seen from the military, from working with other organizations, is they're approaching it from the opposite perspective, where they're approaching it from I'm going to do this manually, and then I'm going to slowly build in manual or automated processes to it. And I think we're approaching it opposite, where I want to build in as many automated processes from the get-go, and then I'll catch up on what little bits I can't do like that. And in the long run, I think that'll save us a lot of time and effort.
Absolutely. And maybe make us a little more secure, because you can finally get to continuous. I can't tell you how many people I've seen who have been QA or an IG, some kind of security manager, and they fear the automation. When we were moving to the cloud and to start building in these automations, we were able to show how you could take that risk management framework. And I'll tell you, Tony, when you say that 3-letter acronym, it gives me the heebie-jeebies. But how you could take that process in your software development and build in those security checks, and take something that took an average of almost 2,000 hours per product in software application. And it would take roughly 2.5 months to finally get the archive documentation together. And you took 7 minutes going through the automation. And people lost their minds because they felt like, yeah, but this is how I've built my job, is around doing this. And so on that part, I want to pivot over just a little bit, because I want to introduce Naveen and Zach. Some of you have got to see them out there before. These are a couple of our people who have been on the offensive side and practice that regularly. Naveen's somebody who's been able to do both security on the offense and defense side, and so he's got a good perspective. And I want to ask Naveen the first question, because there are a lot of regulatory requirements from health to finance, and even now international and state regulations. Can you talk a little bit about data loss prevention, or DLP, and how those solutions play into some of the compliance standards that are out there right now?
Yeah, I'm pretty familiar with DLP. I've worked on DLP products, several of them over my career, and also on the offensive side. So I have interesting perspective there. So DLP is one component of data management in general. So data management program involves, generally identifying where your data is across your entire environment, being able to classify that data, PII, PCI, whatever it is, and then putting controls in place so that only authorized people can gain access to it, segregating it, and so forth. And so DLP solutions will help you with that process and some of the controls like network monitoring, making sure that sensitive information isn't leaving the network through egress points where it shouldn't be leaving, helping you find that data and classify it in the first place. And there are also a lot of vendors that integrate DLP into their own products, like Microsoft Office has it integrated, Exchange, your Palo Alto firewall, and so forth. So DLP can help in those regards.
So with respect to you on the data loss prevention side, what are some of the things when you say that can help? How have you as an attacker maybe seen some of these regulatory requirements that, let me ask you the first question. Does a hacker or an attacker or an offensive person, do you guys care or even look at regulatory requirements and compliance standards?
No, and I don't, maybe Zach can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know of any hacker that actually thinks about whether a company is compliant or not. And it just doesn't cross their mind. And, DLP solutions are good from the perspective of preventing accidental mistakes. Like, your HR person is sending an email to their Gmail account with, a bunch of employee information. They're not trying to do anything malicious. If you've got a good DLP solutions that's been tuned and implemented, it can, block that kind of stuff from happening. From an attack perspective, there's about 1 billion ways you can evade that and problems with, just data sprawl in general. First, even knowing where your data is. I think last year at some point we did a pen test at a hospital, and you wouldn't think printers are a particularly important source of information, but people don't prioritize printers for whatever reason. However, we're looking through these printers and we were finding patient records and PII and all sorts of stuff just sitting there. And these are devices that an attacker could just literally take over easily, with various vulnerabilities and issues, misconfigurations, and get access to all the sensitive data in the environment that way. So just knowing where your data is, that's the beginning of the problem. And it's a lot more complicated now with the sprawl, into the cloud and other environments with remote work. And then there's also an assumption of, well, if I've protected it and have the right controls in place, then I'm secure. But most of the attacks we do are credential attacks, right? So we're getting access to credentials of authorized users. And if you are getting a privileged account, then all bets are off, right? So thinking about how you get access to those credentials is really important too.
It really is. And so I'm going to take that to go on over to Zach and just to bring up the credential attacks and a little follow on with that. It feels like, and I was in a conversation where Jamaica, and she's amazing. She's the auth CISO, and she made the comment that credentials are the new perimeter. And so do you think as an attacker, Zach, is that something that maybe you would agree with? And when we talk about credentials and those kind of policies and compliance standards that are out there, what are you seeing as an attacker that works to maybe stymie when you're doing an attack, and how you maybe get around that, or things that maybe aren't as effective that you're able to get around?
Yeah, so I would say that I would agree that really identity management, which is credentials and making that the new perimeter, I would agree that that's a pretty large part of a lot of security issues these days, because there's a lot of implicit trust. Just having the credential, you can pretty much access any resource anywhere within a trusted area. So really locking down credentials, where they're good, and how long they're good for, and kind of setting up firewalls around that. And that kind of leads into zero trust a little bit. Was there more?
So you say good. What can you define good a little bit? Like if we're talking logon or password complexity or the time differential, what kind of, when you're doing a brute force attack to be able to get at somebody, what gives you pause or lets you know that, yep, they've got a good policy in place?
Yeah, so from an attacker's perspective, when you're going in blind, you don't really know what the policy is right away. But through a little trial and error, you can, through open source intelligence, discover some usernames and then start confirming if they're real or not. But once you found one, you can purposely try to lock it out, and you do it in rapid succession. So if I try to log in 5 times in 10 seconds and I find out I got locked out after the 5th time, now I know what the lockout counter is. And so now I know with all the other users I have, I can attempt to log in with them 3 or 4 times without ever locking out any other account. So just by trial and error, you can kind of discover what the policy is. But once you do discover the policy and you do get access, I'd say if you don't have any lockout policy, that's really bad, because then an attacker just has free reign to start guessing. And then password complexity, really making sure that you have a minimum length requirement with some special characters required. And one of the biggest things you can do to improve your domain hygiene that's not necessarily related to complexity is blacklisting keywords. So don't let them use anything about the company in the password. Don't let them use anything about your company products in the password. Don't let them use anything about their own username in the password. So just focusing on doing those type of things actually really limits the success an attacker will have.
Yeah, it's. I'm glad that you're speaking. It almost feels like you're speaking from experience, like you've seen company name 123 several times over. So from that perspective, Tony, did you have something that you want to? It looked like you were pondering a little bit with what Zach and Naveen were talking about, because I did want to follow up with Naveen a little bit on OSINT and everything. But did you have something that you wanted to say or ask him?
No, I think it covered it. We'll swing back to it when we have a little bit more chat time. I wanted to talk about RMF and frameworks in general, and how they are frameworks and people look at them as Bibles instead of frameworks, and then they waste time working on things they don't need to be wasting them on. There's a lot more that we can talk about there, but yeah, go ahead, keep going.
So just to kind of finish off then with the open source intelligence side, Naveen, the people have a lot of compliance standards around their perimeter, and the OSINT comes at you from the outside. Can you explain just a little bit about open source intelligence, what it is, maybe how you've used it to be able to get access and get around some of these compliance measures we've got on the outside?
Yeah. So OSINT just refers to anything that an attacker can publicly get his or her hands on, whatever means possible. So there's a lot of prior breach data that involve usernames and passwords. There's GitHub buckets, S3 buckets, GitHub repos, you name it. Anything that an attacker can learn about your company online falls into OSINT. People who work there, data, credentials, and so forth. So why it's relevant for compliance is that I think often people put a perimeter around compliance. Like, I'm going to have, this is my production environment. I want to make sure this is compliant. And we recently did a pen test for a SOC 2 compliant vendor. And they're really focused on their production environment. And through open source intelligence, we found a key in a GitHub repo. That key happened to be for a staging environment. But it turned out it also worked against the production environment. So if we had put our blinders on and said, we're only going to focus on production and nothing else, and just this environment, we would have missed that. And attackers really don't care about, hey, this is production, this is staging, this is development. They're trying to get everything they can to get as much impact as possible. And so that's really important. And also, I mean, that also applies internally. For instance, we regularly run our scans, Horizon 3 with customers, and something like Bluekeep or Eternal Blue will show up, right? And that's a severe vulnerability where an attacker can gain direct access to a box. Now, from a customer perspective, they might say, well, that's just a lab environment. It doesn't really matter. However, if you're able to get on that box and you find credentials, passwords, hashes, and then you can pivot and maneuver with them into other environments, then you basically have the keys to the kingdom at that point. So thinking about environment segregation and all the information OSINT an attacker has available to them is really important.
No, and that's a good point. And once again, you're bringing it back to credentials obviate a lot of compliance standards. Go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand compliance is going to focus on things that protect user data or whatever particular industry you're in. They are focused on those components of it. But attackers don't care about those. I really like the way you put that, Naveen, this perimeter around those things. It's more looking at the forest as well as the trees, vice just zooming in onto a particular tree. And I think Travis said that same thing. So attackers are going to be looking far and wide, and they have as much time as they need. This whole defensive folks, organizations have to get it right all the time, and attackers only got to get right one time. And they have time is on their side. It's all a matter of what are the economics of that attack and that breach to them. How badly do they want to get in? So I really like that idea that if you're compliance, if you're going to go for compliance, that's great. And you're focusing on, surrounding those things, but don't forget about those best practices. Don't forget about applying the same types of protections and thinking about your threat model and the different attack vectors and checking them on a regular, more continuous basis, because attackers are looking everywhere for data. It doesn't matter if it's in your dev environment, if it's in your stage environment, if it's out in the world where you don't have any control over it anymore. I found my home IP address in a old IRC chat channel. This was years ago, and I've moved since then, so don't go looking for it. But with open source intelligence, because I was doing it on myself, I wanted to know what could an attacker find my home IP address? And the answer is yes, they could. So now you've pinpointed my external firewall instead of me being a person who can go anywhere. You pinpoint, you found me. So I really like that. And I'm going to write that down because I think I want to dive more into that later. This perimeter around compliance. That's good. That's good. You should do this for a living, brother.
I love being surrounded by smarter than me
Yes.
people. So here we're going to go. So we are in about, it's been about 40 minutes. So I'd highly encourage, if any of you have any questions for Tony, Travis, Zach, Naveen, for anybody here, please go ahead and queue them up. We're going to go through. This is going to be the last real slide before the aha moments. So just to kind of wrap it up on some of the things, you got to hear some of the perspectives and a few stories. And I think what we want to make sure is that compliance isn't the end. We're good. We're compliant. And then you get back to what you were doing. Compliance is really a starting point. That's what you've got to build from and make that your floor, not the ceiling in your house. What you also really want to do, and I think what we're seeing after SolarWinds, is people are starting to they want to understand their risk more. And this goes from the practitioner to the C-suite to the board. We're starting to identify things as risk that we never really considered before. And so I didn't share one story that I had. We had, when I was at U.S. Transportation Command, I was the deputy CIO there. And we started working with our acquisitions directorate because we were responsible for global logistics for the military. And so, but it's amazing where military people will move quite a bit. And we call that a permanent change of station, where they will move their assignments or they're just deploying forward somewhere. And it's not just them, they've got their bags, they've got stuff. And you have a lot of information on my personal information. We're on manifests, we're going around everywhere. And so when we're shipping stuff everywhere, there's a lot of data that goes with it. And it's not all on military ships. As a matter of fact, 80% of military logistics happens through commercial means. And so what we started doing was looking at NIST 800-53. And when we started looking at the cybersecurity framework and what a supply chain looked like, we realized our data is going out to all these people, and it's secure with us. But once we give it to them, they're faxing it, sending it, emailing it out in the open, completely unsecure. And so we started working through, how do we impose the national cybersecurity framework and some of those data management protocols? You got to hear about data loss prevention from Naveen a little bit. How do we impose some of those requirements? And all of a sudden, we started getting threatened back. Well, then our costs are going to go up. Because if you're going to do that, it's going to cost me more, and you're going to pay for that security because that's your requirement. And you're thinking, how is that not your requirement to take care of our data out there? And it became.
I want to touch on that for a minute. I think that's really important to understand. You know, we're a small company, and it's costs us quite a bit to go down the SOC 2 component of it. Right? Because we want to make sure that we are compliant. We know we are secure. I want to make sure that we are showing everybody that we are secure through the compliance of it and all that stuff as well, right? But it costs a lot of money, and small organizations, small to medium businesses, do they know, can they afford it? Can they afford the people to maintain it? Then when it comes up again, can they afford to bring the people on again to do that? It's a difficult thing to navigate for larger organizations. You think about how much scale that is. Now they probably have dedicated bodies to compliance and all of those things, but are they really more focused on reducing how much that costs to them by doing the minimal efforts there? There is this conflict there between, I want to show people that I am secure, but this costs me a lot of time and resources. How do I balance those two things? And that's the part that bothers me about compliance and how it's currently implemented from a regulatory standpoint. So just something I wanted to bring up.
No, and I think that's fair. And I think that also goes to what you and Travis brought up. If you can create automation that goes into it, it opens up, it makes it not cost as much in manpower. It makes it cost less in time when you can, if somebody needs an audit and you go, yeah, okay, I just hit a printout because that was last Thursday's scan, and so we're good. That's a different kind of game changer where you're making things painless instead of painful. And I think that's kind of what we all want to get to, is that painless compliance. Go ahead, Travis.
One thing with that, Monty, also, if you make it too painful, a lot of people just won't do it. And then you're going to have issues run to where you're not compliant. For example, from a military perspective, we had a requirement for certain compliances where if you were going to move any data from one system to another system, every file name, everything had to be logged, right? So when I got to this organization where I was working with that, I saw this spreadsheet that people were supposed to fill out when they were moving data from one system to another. And if you're moving hundreds upon thousands of files, or people aren't going to do that. They didn't. They just wouldn't log it, and then they would just go about their business, and then you wouldn't be meeting those requirements. On automating that, every single one of those files was scanned before and after, on each system. So I have a way to do this, and so we devised a process where we would record the log, the files for that, and then they could insert that, and it would meet those requirements. So by automating this and making it painless for the people, they will actually help you within the process, versus before, when they knew that what they were supposed to do, but they didn't have the time or couldn't do it. If you were to bring it up, you were just going to run into a brick wall. Well, nobody wanted to work with you and nobody wanted to talk with you because you were just going to smack them for not doing what, was supposed to be done. So just a thought.
That's not fun for anybody.
Nope.
Okay. Item number 3. So understanding your risk, and I think taking a step back, it's pretty important. And you got to hear from Zach and Naveen as well. There's so much implicit trust that we're placing in some of these tools that have agents throughout our networks, that we get a lot of great insight, and it's a lot easier. But understanding that risk that we're bringing in to our business and brand is pretty important. So revealing that risk is there, and that's why you got to prove it. Understanding and saying, okay, I'm good, and getting it out there, that's one thing. But proving it and having somebody else, whether it's a red team attack or whether it's a chaos monkey that takes something down, so that you can understand just how fragile is our network, just how fragile is our compliance. Are there ways to get around multi-factor authentication? Do we have that employed everywhere? Or have our admins created a couple guac proxies on the outside so they can download what they want to the inside without having to go through our current compliance tools and everything? And so proving that, investigating it, proving it, and getting, and honestly, a third-party assessment, if you need some honesty, that's not a bad way to go. So you definitely want to look at that. And then you got to continuously assess. I'm going to bang on this because I think you've heard this from everybody here. And we've got to get to a point in agile security. And if that means agile compliance, where, yeah, and when I speak agile, I'm speaking on the software development side, where it's build, test, deploy, build, test, deploy, build, test, deploy. And you do it and you get that feedback and you get that loop spinning. That is anything but what we're doing in compliance now. It's a painful message. We do it and then we walk away. And so there is a build, there's a deploy, there's very little testing. And once you deploy, it's once saved, always saved. Go ahead, Tony.
Don't touch it till, if it ain't broke, don't touch it. That's
Please
the
don't.
mindset. Please don't touch it. Yeah.
Yeah. So the last part here, asking the questions, are we compliant and what risk are we accepting? And I'm not sure why that last little part isn't shown right there, but you really got to understand what risk you're accepting and then go in and verify that answer. That proving your rules and tools is absolutely imperative to truly understanding your risk profile out there and really getting after some of the answers, because otherwise what you're going to be faced with here when it comes to compliance is a risk that goes all the way up. And then you have this annual, whether it's a pen test or a compliance measure, some kind of audit, and then, okay, we found some things, we're going to fix them. And then your risk goes down and then it just accumulates. And so I don't think any of us would want our bank data to follow that upper one, to know that, okay, I know I need to move money out of the bank because they're coming out, they haven't had an audit for a year, and in the next 3 months they're going to, so their risk end is really high. That would not be appealing for any of us. And so getting into a continuously assessment way ahead and understanding automation and what those capabilities are out there is pretty darn important to making sure that you are not just compliant, but a little more secure than just that compliance floor. And so last part here, I want to make sure if there are any other questions that anybody's got out there. I haven't seen any posted in the forum here yet, but I want to open it up for Tony. If you want to ask Travis, Zach, or Naveen any questions in particular based on what we've already talked about and on their perspectives with compliance thus far.
Yeah, first I want to make sure everybody knows we asked Travis to jump in a little bit later, so he didn't quite make the slide. He's also an AHA guy too, so I just want to make sure.
Absolutely.
And we did get one. Robbie had posted a message. Zach or Naveen or Travis, one of you guys want to jump on it. For a typical SMB trying to balance compliance and security, how often would you assess the efficacy and application of your work, monthly, quarterly, etc.? I'll tell you right now, I would say constantly.
I think it really matters on what your risk is. Like, do you have much risk in your IT infrastructure or on that you're storing digital data? What kind of data are you storing? If it's not really anything you need to worry about, then not very often. It's just going to be a cost eater for your business. And so if you do have some important data, then I'd focus on assessing the controls of that data often. How often is a question of, well, how much can you afford to spend on testing these controls versus how much is it going to cost you if it's ever compromised? So it's really a hard question to answer generically.
If I were to add to that, I would say that Travis had a really good story around automation. The types of tools you're using to assess matter a lot. If you can automate, why not run that as often as you can to surface the problems? And if that's cost effective and doesn't involve a lot of human labor, I think that's the ideal path to go and where we want to get to as an industry.
Yeah, and if you look, I mean, that slide, that image that Monty had brought up, where it's showing that accrual of risk, that's accrual of risk. That doesn't always mean that doesn't mean danger. It just means there is a risk there. And the longer time between when it was checked last and you verified that it was good and the next time, there's additional risk there. The time, component of that is part of it. I love that you brought in, Zach, the cost of it. Most organizations, I look at it from cybersecurity standpoint specifically. I want to be secure all the time, but you're absolutely right. How much does it cost a company, and how much will it cost if I am breached? Which I hate saying to customers, but that is the truth of it. I can't spend more money on protecting it than it would cost me if I lost it. Doesn't make fiscal sense because we're trying to run a business, and that's hard to say.
But that's important, Tony. I think understanding cost lends itself to prioritization. Just like Zach was saying, if it's not costing, and then it's not a priority. And so understanding where that fits in your prioritization is no different than a criticality in context. And understanding that, hey, this vulnerability, I know that it's a 9.8, but it's so complex, it's unreachable, there's no POC exploit for it. So maybe it isn't quite that high. Understanding the cost of that is pretty darn important to prioritization. I'm really glad that got brought up, because that really helps you understand what compliance, because if all compliance are equal, there are some that are more equal than others. So understanding that when you're going through these machinations is pretty darn important.
Yeah, that was a good question, Robbie. Thank you.
Yep, very good question. And Mark posted a comment, continuous automation. I think he loves that idea. So, and that's definitely something you got to invest in and lean forward on here. If anybody out there had any other questions, you're more than free to ask them. The last thing I wanted to bring up was for Zach and Naveen, and that's on network segmentation. Network segmentation is something that we're really focused on right now. You can see it in the payment card industry. Annually, when they do their PCI DSS audits, part of that is scoping a network, and they recommend network segmentation. So when it comes to a cardholder data environment, that you are making sure that you've got an area cordoned off to make sure that network segment, that things can't get in or out, that absolutely should not and unequivocally should not be getting in or out of there. So network segmentation, Zach and Naveen, if you don't mind, we've talked about a little bit about what it is and why it's important. What kind of attack is opened up to you if a company has not implemented that network segmentation, whether it's an ACL or credential that's required? What kind of things have you seen up front, and what's it opened up if it's not implemented? I'll go Naveen first, or Zach first.
Yeah, I would say even if there are controls in place that the company has implemented to do network segmentation, like certain routing rules, ensuring the PCI segment is in a VLAN that can only talk to certain devices. I've seen in the real world where you can do what's called a VLAN hopping attack. And that's where the attacker can change their network packets on their machine to make it appear like they should be routing to say the PCI segment, and it works not in all environments, but it'll circumvent certain segmentation controls. So just because you implement a control doesn't mean that it's effective.
Yeah,
Naveen or Tony, go ahead.
yeah, MAC address flooding on the switch. We've seen those doing the same thing, essentially turning that switch that is, segregating that traffic based on a specific tag put on it by the switch itself. You just keep telling it, you just keep filling up that address space with all these different MAC addresses, and then it just says, okay, I'm going to send everything everywhere, and essentially turns it into a hub. So you do see degradation in the, in flow of traffic, but now everybody is sending all of their traffic on all ports. So, and you can see traffic that way as well.
You bet. And I'll tell you, it's as we lean in, and one of the big buzzwords right now in the new framework is zero trust. You got to hear that brought up a little bit. And to me, zero trust is very much about blast radius containment. So if somebody did get in, how do you try to contain that threat or that exposure or that whatever it might be to a certain area? And you do that through a lot of network segmentation is one aspect of it, a lot of control and authenticated control that is very time-based and temporal. There's a lot of different aspects into it, but network segmentation is a big part of that as well as we lean into zero trust. We're about at the end of the time that we've got for this week here. And so I wanted to turn it over to you, Tony, to go ahead and close us out and bring us home.
Yeah, I appreciate the team. Thank you guys for taking time out of your day to jump on this. I know these are fun for us, and we're doing what we can to help the community. I appreciate everybody's time. I know compliance, with 10 attendees, compliance is not the most, coolest thing to talk about and hear about, but it is important. And I'm glad that you guys signed up and went through it with us. And thank you very much for your questions. And I'm looking forward to the next one. Monty, appreciate your time as well. So yeah, back to you. Thanks, brother. You bet. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. If you have any questions whatsoever for us here, you can send it to customer success at horizon3.ai, and we'll make sure that we get the answers for you that you got for anybody here on the panel. I wish you well with all your compliance efforts. God knows that we're with you on that. There are some rough things that we've all got to go through, but definitely want to help raise that collective bar for each of us out there. And so if there's anything we can do to answer your questions afterwards, please fire away to us. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll look forward to next month where we get to have another great conversation. Take care, and we'll see you soon.